So let's move on to Italia's question, which is, speaking of world builder's disease, what
Sure.
if you just world build for the building itself without a set project in mind?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, like sometimes when I talk about world building, I think I can come across as somebody that's maybe dumping on just freeform world building, and I'm not. That is it's not my intention. It's great to just sit down, and if that's your thing, then that's your thing, and you're focused on your goal, and your goal is just to create till it's time to go to bed and then wake up the next morning and continue. So cool, and you're doing it. But I think that anytime you have a goal in mind and you start to deviate too far from what is necessarily adjacent to that goal, you're just getting further and further from accomplishing that thing, you know. And it's not necessarily bad to create content. People like content, and whatever you create, cool, cool. But you didn't finish the thing. The thing that you set out to do just got a little further away because you spent, an hour a day, whatever, doing that other thing. So if there's a goal in mind, just focus on that first and foremost. If the goal is just to freeform it, then you're doing it. And in a way, like a lot of us envy that because you're always working towards your final goal, like there's no deadline. You can go after anything your heart desires. And look, I love that. I wish that was what I was, I wish that was the project for me sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are just doing world building for the sake of world building, we call it pure world building.
Mhm.
Um, there are also ways to get world builder's disease. So, in my opinion,
Mhm.
if you disappear down a very small rabbit hole and you forget about a lot of other stuff, that could be considered world building disease in that you're losing scope, essentially. So if you start detailing in exquisite detail the designs of shoes within the ages of a single town within your entire world, and you've not done any detail on anything else, unless that's really your goal, that would be considered world building disease. If you have followed the rabbit hole down accidentally and got to a level of detail that you have not fleshed out anywhere else in the world and is not interesting to you, but you're doing it compulsively, world builder's disease.
Yeah.
That's what I would
And
say. If you're building and you're still having fun and everything's integrated and everything's kind of fleshed out in the same way, then you're cool, man. And you're having
yeah,
fun, which is honestly the point of pure world building.
it is. And like as I sit here, I guess maybe I'm kind of wondering too, and I don't necessarily know the answer to this question, but like when you are just free form world building, are there still specific goals that you're working toward? Like, are you just trying to free form a world where characters live, like where things and plots and stories are happening? Then do you still like deviate into like doing an article about this specific type of tree that you might find there, or do you like work on like the plot and a character and are there still goals in freeform? And I guess for me, like if I was just freeforming, it would still kind of be focused on like what we talked about before, which is characters, right? I would still drop myself into that world and see what I could experience, as a character, as opposed to like maybe if you were like sort of textbook reading about the world, where that's not necessarily like character focused, but more like macro, so if I was a freeform world builder, it would still have the goal of trying to make a world that made sense for a person dropped into it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I will say about this is that I do have a video on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/World Anvil. Incidentally, you can find all of these interviews on there in both in small chunks that answer specific questions and as long interviews. But there is also a video there called Tips to Create Your New World. And in that, I go into detail about what kind of motivations you might have for creating your new world. It's a really interesting thing to think about when you're either at the beginning of the project or you're at a sort of a crux point or a block point at a project. Why are you creating? because that will essentially help you define your scope, define everything else about your world, and that will, it's a really great way to keep going as well.